Good morning and welcome to the second in the spring webinar series from Powwownow. My name is Andrew Armour and I'm your host for today. Today's webinar is entitled Why the Good Shared but the Great Collaborate. It builds upon our webinar from a few weeks ago where we discussed the often ineffective meetings that we seem to have in our lives. Our first webinar, as I say, was called Why It's Smart to Ditch Dumb Meetings, and it was all about good and bad meetings, why this part of business life that is so prevalent often lets us down, and how you can build in smarter meetings. Our final webinar, which is next week on Thursday the 1st of May, is entitled Business Yoga, Why Smarter Businesses Use Flexible Working. But today we're looking at the whole series of collaboration. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to the team that we have here today. Along with myself, there is Robert Gorby, who is the Marketing Director from Powwownow, and John Ball, Communications Manager from Powwownow, who you'll hear from shortly. Daisy Rogers today is looking after our production, and I'm delighted to say we have David Gurteen, who I'll be introducing you to shortly. Today's session should finish up around 11 o'clock, and we would also love you to be involved. Just a quick note, as I say, the next webinar is next Thursday, and that is Business Yoga, Why Smarter Businesses Use Flexible Working. Today, this is the topics that we will be talking about. We'll be talking about what kind of conversations do leaders encourage to build a more collaborative culture. We'll be asking why is it often so hard to communicate well across the business, often even just across the office. We'll be seeing how technology can play its part in helping make things better or hindering collaboration. And we'll also be asking whether just sharing lots of information and spreadsheets and data is actually the same as real collaboration. First of all, though, I'd like to introduce you to John. John is taking care of our poll and our Q&A this morning. So, John, can you explain how the Q&A and the poll works for our guests?
I certainly can. Yeah, we have two ways that we'd like you to try and interact with us today. The first is via a poll. So if you look at the top of the webinar, you have the poll option, and the question we are asking is, does your organisation act in a way that encourages building a more effective collaborative culture? If you could, it's a simple yes or no answer, just let us know what you think, and we'll read out the answers at the end of the webinar. The second way we would like you to speak with us is through the Q&A. Send us your questions, whatever you like regarding the topic, and we will fire them out to our guests at the end of the webinar.
And tricky questions are encouraged.
Definitely so.
Excellent. Okay. First of all, I'm going to deliver just a brief little presentation here on the topic of collaboration before we ask our guests to be involved today. Collaboration is a really hot topic for management and leaders nowadays. And it shouldn't really be a surprise to us. If you look at the history of commerce and trading, especially in a city like London, for example, it was originally started in the tea shops and the coffee shops. And the reason for that is twofold. First of all, it's because coffee and tea was a very valuable commodity. The second thing, of course, is that it was a way for people to connect. It was a way for people to build deals and employ people. And in fact, Lloyd's of London and the original stock exchange were both original tea shops. Nowadays, we still need to connect with people, but it's done in a different way. And it's great to be here at Powwownow because they're very much at the heart of it. And it's very much about this working with people, but using technology in a really smart way. It often means working away from the office. It often means you might be working with a client or with a supplier. Now, just briefly, this whole area of connecting with people is a fascinating topic. This is an interesting way to look at this. Essentially, a lot of the research suggests that it is in fact the weak ties and the casual acquaintances and the people who we do not communicate with regularly who are often the most important to us in terms of solving things. So in this simple little diagram here, the red lines are people's strong connections, the green lines are people's weak ties. And all the research suggests that it is not the people on your own department who are often most valuable to you, it's people across the organisation, and increasingly outside of the organisation, and it's those connections that help us achieve things. There's a great line here from the writer Stefan Lindegaard, which I think sums it up really nicely, and he says, if you can't even share your ideas across the business, how can you expect to share them outside? If anyone is involved in sales or business development, you'll recognise that, because so often you need to have the internal dialogue sorted before you start speaking with clients or suppliers. The American writer Nilofer Merchant has commented a lot on this topic, and there's a lovely phrase that she uses, which is, the future is not created, it is co-created. She discusses a lot about the area of what she describes as the social era of business. The interesting aspect to that is that the social era of business is not about social media, and it's very important to stress that. It's not about social media. Social media, social networks like Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, etc., they play their part. But one of the things that Merchant makes really clear is it's about the personal connections. It's about being able to communicate with people and to work with people. And especially, we'll be talking about this shortly, right across the organisation and up and down the organisation. Morten Hansen is probably the most prominent writer in this field in the area of collaboration, and it's worth our while just being clear on what we mean by collaboration. He describes that it takes place when people from different units work together across teams on a common task, providing significant help. Now, the interesting aspect, the second part of this, sometimes that can be a joint project where the two departments or the two areas of business work together for the same purpose. The other side of it is that it may just be one department providing substantial support or assistance to another department for a specific project. Both cases are very different styles of working, but both are technically collaboration. The interesting aspect that Hansen mentions, and this is, I'm sure any of us who are on email and receive reports and files and updates will recognise this, swapping data itself is not collaboration. And as Hansen said, collaboration is about the people. It's not just about the information and the technology. In terms of the kind of people and the kind of behaviour that we need to be collaborative, the best way to look at this is this famous model, which is about being T-shaped. The vertical axis is your knowledge, your skills, your personal ability, but increasingly it's the horizontal axis, the ability to network well across the business and work well with others. A lot of the research suggests that they increasingly are becoming the most valuable people, both in small businesses and in large corporates. It's people who have this profile, the ability to know their subject, to work well in their areas, but be able to communicate well with others outside of it. Another interesting aspect of this is a quote from the chief engineer at Google, and you can imagine the extreme amount of highly technical, competent people in Google. And yet he acknowledges when new people come into the company, working in isolation leads to disappointment. In other words, even if you're a really, really smart engineer working at Google, you do have to have that T-shaped profile. You have to be able to network with others using technology or using face-to-face. Why is this important? Well, this is some research that came out from Capgemini a few years ago. Most leaders and senior executives seem to want to drive product development, innovation, and service development. Innovation, in effect. And it's interesting that 84% of CEOs surveyed worldwide by Capgemini actually agreed that it was collaboration that drove this kind of development. But, as you can see from the statistic at the bottom there, most organisations really struggle to do it. It's what I call a paradox, a collaboration paradox. Most people agree that they want to collaborate effectively across the organisation because that's how we create, solve, share and manage. But most organisations and managers really struggle to do this. And it's an interesting topic because is it about the process, or is it about the people, or is it about something else? Well, I'm delighted to say that this morning I have someone who can help answer some of those questions. I'm delighted to welcome David Gurteen. David is an acknowledged world expert in the areas of knowledge management. He consults all over the world on this area and presents to conferences and leadership and management teams. In fact, I believe, David, you just flown back last night.
Last night from Abu Dhabi, yes.
Welcome, David. Welcome to the webinar today.
Thank you.
I think what I'd like to do, that was just a very quick overview of the topic, David, but I'd like to see what you think about this first question, which is that we have an enormous amount of technology and great offices with great meeting rooms and squashy couches and lovely corporate boardrooms. Why is it often so difficult to collaborate across the same organisation, or sometimes, as I found out, even just across the office? What's the problem here?
Let me give you a story. I'm going back probably 20 years now. So I used to work for Lotus Development, and my job was International Czar, which was quite an amazing job. My job was to actually work right across the organisation globally to ensure that all the software products that we were developing then, Lotus 123, Lotus Notes, were developed for the international marketplace, and that they could be cost effectively localized. And I was working in the HQ in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and one of the teams I was working with that was developing a new software product had a very hard-nosed, very no-nonsense sort of business manager. And I realized to get him to do the sorts of things I wanted him to do, I needed to build a relationship with him first. And so I spent a lot of time having coffee with him, taking him out to lunch, giving little presentations to his team, building a relationship with him before I actually asked him for anything. And then, so this was all face-to-face. And then once I kind of established that relationship, then I started to agree the sorts of things that I wanted him to do. And I had no authoritative power. This is why I used the relationship approach.
So that takes time, though, doesn't it, to do that?
It takes time, but it's time well invested. Because what happened here was, I'm sitting in the cafeteria one day, he walks across to me, and he's stringing a whole load of abuse. He turns around and walks away. Like, what's happened? I get back to my desk in my office and discover that a new marketing manager in the UK has just sent a very critical email to him about the work he was doing, and copied it to VPs and all and sundry. And he was very, very upset. Now, he replied very nicely to him, but the internal email he sent to his team, and somebody on his team forwarded this little email to me, basically said, just look what these idiots, actually didn't use the word idiots, are asking for an international now. Don't have anything more to do with them. We're not going to do anything more for them now, from now on.
And this is the same organisation?
The same organisation. He was so upset, so incensed by this email. Now, the person who sent it to him had no relationship with him, didn't know him, didn't know what was going on. So he didn't know the guy's character. He didn't know the context. He didn't know that I had agreed to do a whole lot of things with him, and everything was in place. So the lesson for me in that is that it's about knowing the context. It's about knowing the relationships. And too often, when we're working with people at a distance and through technology, we've got no context. We've got no relationship. We know nothing about the culture. Because often we're working across cultures, and that can be a big issue. And so we upset people and get things wrong. And you can spend a lot of time building trust. And if you get some little thing wrong, or big thing wrong, you can destroy that trust in an instant.
So for you then, in terms of that ability to communicate across an organisation, it's about building those relationships
first. Yes. The relationships before, building the relationship comes before the actual collaboration. And that means investing time. And
that can be hard nowadays.
It's really hard because people say, I don't have the time. But it's a little bit like trying to saw down a tree with a blunt saw. Surely it makes sense to put some time in to sharpen the saw.
Well, on that point, the next question we had for you today is, again, and it's almost, I've heard you talk about this concept of what you call leadership conversation, how leaders communicate across a business, one-to-one or using technology. How do you think a leader goes about building an organisation that is more collaborative, trying to build those relationships? What does the leader need to do, and what is this leadership conversation stuff?
I mean, I think it is very much about conversation. I love little stories because I think they actually capture what's going on. As you know, I run these things called knowledge cafes.
Yes.
I bring people together basically to have conversations around a question. And I did a cafe some 10 years ago now for an organisation, and the question I posed to them was, what are the barriers to knowledge sharing? Could have been, what are the barriers to collaboration in your organisation, and how might you overcome them? And within a few minutes, somebody had stopped the whole session and said, we've got to capture what's being talked about here. And what I hadn't realised was that I had 3 departments in the room that worked in silos. This was the first time they'd ever talked to each other. And they were surfacing all sorts of business problems and issues and opportunities as well that nobody knew a thing about.
So is that a question of leadership?
I think it is, yes. And in some ways it's a question, because to me leadership is not just about, the senior managers or the senior leaders. I think everybody in an organisation who has got influence and is a leader, has got the ability to influence people and change the course of things. But clearly, the CEO, the VPs have got greater influence than, say, a new graduate, but even a new graduate has got influence within their...
So that's this concept of leadership conversation. Everyone is part of that. Everyone has a responsibility to converse with people. And
again, see, it's about building the relationships and engaging people.
Yeah,
I think this is the other thing that we do wrong. Who is it? It's Peter Block who says there can never be. What does he say? He says yes has no meaning if there isn't the opportunity to say no.
Yes, I've heard this. Yeah,
which is a wonderful little phrase. So he's actually saying that one of the things that managers need to do is to actually get people to surface their issues, to surface their problems, their doubts, their cynicism, because
and make it okay to do that.
And make it okay to do that, because what they tend to do is tend to suppress that, because it's negative, negative thinking. But saying if you want people to really engage, you need to give them the opportunity to do that.
Well, there's often a phrase that conflict sparks when you have different
yes, exactly,
disagreements.
Exactly. I mentioned a quote earlier from General Patton that if everybody in the same room agrees, then nobody's actually thinking.
Yes. So there's a need for conflict.
There's
managed in a way.
It's conflict with respect. We talk a lot about this word.
Yes.
Respect when we're having conversations. The problem is that too often we get into debates, and debates then fall into emotional arguments, and then there's no thinking going on. It's winner or loser. So what I'm looking for when I talk about conversation, I'm looking for dialogue. Theodore Zeldin says well than that about dialogue. He says the sort of conversation that he likes is one where we're prepared to emerge a slightly different person. So we're prepared to listen, we're prepared to learn.
That's fantastic. It's fascinating to hear your thoughts on this, David, today. I'm now going to bring in a slightly different angle to this and introduce Robert Gorby from Powwownow. Robert, we've heard there, fascinating hearing David mention the whole area of leadership and why often people struggle to build relationships. But of course, we have a lot of good technology nowadays. How do you see, as someone who's working in this area and has seen the good and bad of it, how do you see technology helping or hindering this sort of collaboration?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, what David was talking about there was really fascinating. Actually, one of the things that stood out for me is this idea that you have to build a relationship first before you collaborate. And I think that's a potential danger with technology. If you use technology as that sole communication tool without trying to build a personal relationships, then it can become a hindrance. Then it's just you can't hide behind an email, you can't hide behind some form of technology.
Yes,
so I think that's really kind of a really strong, powerful point I took out of what David was just talking about. The other thing as well is think about the person. So again, technology on its own, for technology's sake, is a hindrance. What it has to do, it really has to be something that fits in with the way people work today, the way they communicate today, and something that really also doesn't ask too much of them in terms of the change they need to make to use that technology. I think that's a really important point.
Because often a big issue with a lot of the technology is that it's implemented, to be fair, mostly by perhaps the technical people in the business, but the take-up is often really difficult, isn't it, of using new technology?
That's right. That's one challenge that a lot of technology companies will have is this issue of, actually, the company's brought in this new technology and it's all great, it's big kind of sort of flash in the pan, and then it dies down because nobody's using it. The reason for that is the sort of 3 A's, if you like. It's not easily available to the users. It's not easily accessible in terms of easy use. And it's not easily affordable for people to either buy or to use. So I think you've got to get when you're looking at getting a technology that will work for people and that will be used and that will become a help, it needs to be available, affordable, accessible.
Well, next week we were talking about flexible and remote working next week, but that technology is very much an enabler of enabling people to work from home, to work from clients and suppliers' offices and things. As a follow-up question for you, Robert, what are the trends that you're seeing with this collaborative technology, the tools? What are the sort of main things that you're seeing out there with customers and clients and things?
I think the big trend that we're seeing right now is this move to much more remote and flexible working. So we've got a lot more people who are working remotely, not necessarily travelling into an office, not necessarily even having an office. And that's a really big trend at the moment. Now, there's two things happening here. It's been driven in its own right by lots of pressures, but lots of reasons why, and it's also been driven by the technology that's available now that enables people to work more flexibly and more remotely. Some of the kind of key trends that we see that is being driven by the need for people to collaborate in different ways are things like growth in tools such as video calling, and this relates a little bit back to what Dave was saying about making things personal. I think again it's important that when you are looking at using technology that there is an element of the personalization in that technology.
And video very much can do that.
Video very much can do that because then you can see the whites of people's eyes, you can actually see them, you see the body language, which is very important in collaboration and communication, and that's really important. That's things that you lose when you're on an email or when you're on an online collaboration tool. It's the ability to see people. Technology is out there to enable you to do that. So I think that's the one big thing that I think is really driving quite rapid growth in what we're seeing. Other things as well, of course, include things like screen sharing and file sharing, and effectively these are technologies that enable you to have the same type of conversation or collaboration as if you were in the room with somebody. So it's how do you see that person? How do you share documents with them? How do you share your screen with them so you can all kind of talk about the same thing? And so there's quite a few technologies that are growing. So the download of file sharing, video calling, really growing rapidly. And
presumably a lot of the technologies like tablets and smartphones make, in a way, the hardware makes it more easily available, and software that you're involved in, Powwownow, enables it's open to everyone.
Yeah, but I think actually there's a danger there that there's so much technology out there now, and everybody kind of has their own sort of preferred apps and preferred devices. The other consideration here is that you not only have to find something that works for you, but if you want to get other people to use that technology to collaborate with other people, you need to get them to buy into it and to be able to use it and to want to use it. So there's so many different options out there. That kind of goes back to this idea of technology can be a help as long as it's right for you as a user, but also right for the people you want to be collaborating with.
Okay, I'd like to ask you both at this point, if you had to advise a leader of an organisation the three main things that they should be doing to encourage a more collaborative organisation, what they would be. What are the three things that you'd be recommending? Dave, I'll start with you, David.
Okay. Three things. The first two are very broad, and the third one is very specific and something that people can take away and do almost a day. The first two is take some time to understand what conversational leadership's about, what it means to be a conversational leader, because I think this is at the heart of creating a collaborative environment. The second is to take a look at the Knowledge Cafe or the World Cafe. Both those tools are very, very, very powerful conversational tools for getting people to build relationships, for surfacing problems, surfacing issues, learning from each other, sharing. They're just very, very powerful tools. But there's the one point I really want to share. At the end of last year, I ran a Knowledge Cafe for a whole bunch of folk from the public sector in the Cabinet Office, in fact. I think you were there, weren't you, Andy?
Yes.
And one of the things I learnt at the end of that cafe was that the Cabinet Office were running something called randomized coffee trials. Don't get put off by the techie term. It's a very simple idea. Essentially, it's about bringing two people together in the organisation randomly and allowing them to have coffee for 30 minutes the next week, and not to define what it is they get to talk about. If they want to talk about work, that's fine. If they want to talk about their personal lives or football or whatever, that's also fine. The whole idea is for them to build a personal relationship, and it's the serendipity out of that comes out of that. You're never too sure what's going to come out of it. And there's some very simple tools that enable you to do that. Lots and lots of organisations have picked up on it. I've ended up promoting it. I know the Department of Education has picked up on it. The Knowledge and Human Development Authority in Dubai are using it. The Bank of England have got something called Coffee Falls, where they bring 4 people together in an IT department at random to have conversations around IT issues.
So it's called
randomised coffee trials. If you want to know more, simply Google randomised coffee trials, and you will find a lot more about who's doing them, the benefits, and actually how to make them work.
And Rob, from your side, what 3 things would you be recommending for sort of leaders about what should they be doing?
Yeah, in terms of driving a collaborative culture, we often hear a lot of people talking about the silos in most businesses, and that's often a common complaint of people saying there's too many silos. And I think really having common goals that are across these departments, and not at a high level. All companies have the same common goal, but at a really kind of granular level across teams, it's how is marketing working with development, how is marketing working with sales, how are sales working with development, what are the kind of common goals that they have in common, and make sure everybody is clear on what they are, because that will make it personal. That will make people have to collaborate as well. That's a pretty important point, I think. Secondly, in terms of this idea of flexible working, remote working, it's making that is happening. We're seeing big growth in that. It's making sure that you've got the technology and the tools to enable people to collaborate effectively when they are doing that. And the third point is actually, just forget work for a moment and forget, you've got a lot of people in a building or in an organisation, and how do you, going back again to this idea of building a relationship, getting people to build relationships with each other, what sort of extracurricular or, non-work related activity can you bring into that business, be it a charity challenge or an event or some sort of off-site, and making sure you do those regularly just so people can get out of the kind of day-to-day grind and have a conversation, have a chat and get common.
You know what's crazy? That so many organisations have sort of drastically cut back on the socialisation that goes on in the organisation.
Yeah, interesting.
To cut back on budgets. And again, it's a very short-sighted.
Because as you pointed out with your original story and your point about the randomised coffee, it's often in those casual, informal areas that you build the trust to make the collaboration.
Exactly, yes.
Okay, we're coming into the final lap of our session today. I'd like to bring back my colleague John. John has been keeping an eye on comments and the poll. So do you want to give us feedback on the poll first, John?
Yeah, sure. So we asked right at the beginning of the webinar, does your organisation act in a way that encourages building a more collaborative culture? Thanks for everyone that's got back to us. 82% said yes, they do try and encourage a collaborative culture, so with 12% saying no.
That's quite high. I'd like to ask David and Rob. So that's 82% think the leaders of the organisation are trying to do the right thing to.
They're encouraging it.
Do you expect something as high as that, or?
Right now, it's quite high actually, but I did expect it to be high. I think people are realising now the only way to get ahead as a business, within a business and across the board is by collaborating, by creating partnerships, both at a business level and at a personal level. So, that's great if that's the general level.
David? It doesn't surprise me at all. I mean, I think every organisation I go into, they're talking about, creating collaborative.
They're trying so hard to do this.
And if you noticed, the Bank of England the other day, the relatively new governor just announced a new strategy for the Bank of England. It's called One Bank.
Right.
He's looking to break down all the silos in the bank, which have been there for many, many years. So, yes, I think it's not too surprising, the figures, but I think the real challenge is that most organisations don't quite know how to do it. Exactly. That's the challenge.
We actually have time for a few questions. So, John, have we had some questions come through?
We have had several questions come through, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. If you would like to add any more questions, simply click the Q&A option at the top of the screen. The first question has come from Katie Lee, who asks, is there a risk of becoming a shake hands, kiss babies person and not having the drive to ask for the sale or completing the job? So can you have too much collaboration?
That's a tough question. David?
Collaboration. Whatever we do in our organisations, we should always start off with the purpose. There's no point getting people to collaborate or share just because it's nice to do. So, if you have the problem that the marketing folks aren't effectively communicating or collaborating with R&D, and there are business issues, you're losing sales or what have you because of it, then it makes sense to do something to address it. But just to try to get everybody happy by everybody talking to each other, it's not focused enough. It doesn't make sense to do. And I think a lot of those things, where people maybe are getting to know each other better across the organisation, where there isn't a particular purpose, that usually comes out of other things, where there is a purpose. I think
Rob, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I think absolutely, ultimately a lot of people just need to get to, a result, be that a sale or be that a decision or something. Again, it would be very difficult to just cut to the chase all the time and just constantly ask people for things without having built that kind of relationship and culture. So it is getting a balance. I think it's a balance.
We have had another question comes in that asks, how can you collaborate and work together when there are personal clashes and politics?
David, you must have come across this in your corporate.
Here's one thought, and I'm just going back again to my Lotus days, where I've got to have a difficult conversation with somebody who I know is not terribly collaborative, maybe doesn't particularly like me personally for some reason, and I need to have a difficult conversation with them. Now I can phone them up if they're at a distance, and there's a good chance it's going to go pear-shaped. But what makes sense is, rather than to phone them up, say, okay, who else do I know in that team who I've got a better relationship with? Call them up.
That network.
The networking. Ask what's going on, and they might say to you, look, just give it a few days, David, because there's a big something going on here, and this is not a good time. This guy's going to be especially emotional at the moment. Call him next week when things have calmed down. Or he might say something like, well, actually, that's not the best guy to talk to around your issue. There's somebody else who you should talk to. And he's a lot easier to get on with, but he's got the boss's ear. So
it's using that networking connection.
Use your network and be smart about what you're doing to get around some of the politics and the power issues that are in an organisation. Don't go into it like a bull in a china shop.
Rob, have you got any thoughts on that?
No, that's very interesting. That's so true. I really think that's an excellent
it's a very good way of looking at it. Yeah. One more question from you, John, then we might have to wrap up.
Yep, sure. We have a question from Stuart Johnson, who has said his people he works with have embraced remote working, but how do you develop a specific suite of tools to help the knowledge sharing?
Rob, so I might ask you that one first.
Oh, very good. I mean, I think again it depends on what are they trying to achieve here. I think that's the key thing. What is the achievement? You don't want to just jump in to find the first technology that comes to mind. Is what's important? Is it about regular conversations, regular team meetings where you just need to be able to speak to people? Is it about actually having the ability to do that and then get quick decisions on a specific cloud technology that enables you to file share? So if somebody's working in the US while you're working in China, for example, you're not losing time. It really does depend on the objective. What I would say though is once you have that common objective, it's be very careful about what technology you choose. Thinking about again what I said earlier about this, accessibility, ease of use, and affordability. Because often when you do get into certain technologies, they can tie you up a little bit. So you've got to make sure that what you're choosing has got good reviews from a point of view of ease of use and accessibility.
Have you got any thoughts on that, David? The remote technologies and that sort of thing? How we go about
I think the same point that Rob was making is that it so much depends on what you're trying to do. I mean, again, the adage that I'm always reiterating is, think of the purpose. What's the purpose? What are you trying to do? And then choose the most appropriate tools, whether it's technology or whether they're human-centered tools.
Excellent. We are sort of coming to the end of the webinar. It has been a fascinating conversation, only a brief conversation this morning, but we hope to have further webinars in the future where we can explore these in more detail. Just a quick little summary before we go. We started off with how do the good share but the great collaborate? Well, I think some of the key things we've explored today, it's about the leader setting the example of communicating. It's about embracing the power of those loose connections and the relationship side of things. It's about making collaboration behaviour something that is often part of a review. It's part of the way in which we manage things. Promoting a culture, as we've talked about previously, that questions, allows discussion and debate. It's about giving people the processes and the tools, or as we just heard about, the right tools at the right time to allow people to work. It's important to note that it's not just about sharing files and information. To be clear on what collaboration looks like, and we've mentioned earlier this notion of a T-shaped person, someone who has knowledge and skills but also works across the business. I'd like to thank all of our team here today, Robert, Daisy, John. A big thank you to David, who only flew in from the Middle East last night, so thanks very much, David, really appreciate that. Please join us for the next webinar. It is on Thursday the 1st of May, Business Yoga, why smarter businesses use flexible working. We talked a little bit about flexible and remote working today. We'll be talking about it in detail next week with a business owner and manager who runs a London-based advertising agency while he is based hundreds of miles away. We'll be learning how he has built a successful business in that way next week. A final word, a final comment from the Brian Clough, a rather controversial leader, but his view on leadership: if we have a problem, we sit down and talk about it for 20 minutes and then we decide that I'm right. So hopefully that is not the kind of leaders we have in your organisations. Thank you very much for joining us at the webinar this morning. If you'd like further information on Powwownow and its services, please contact us. In the meantime, thank you very much. Have a great day and goodbye.